Now, Catherine Mansfield from New Zealand, quite well-known writer, poet, okay, and she led a rather constricted life in her native New Zealand, but her stories have also reflected this kind of a sensibility, or this sense of let's say an impending sadness. Okay. Uh, and there is this, people have often said that there is a sense of purity, there is a sense of distilled emotion. Okay. That is emotion at its purest, at its simplest, in the stories of Catherine Mansfield. Okay. And I would agree with that. Because if you have read her short stories, particularly the one called Fly, which you would be dealing with in sometime in the future, Fly essentially is about two people sitting opposite sides of the desk and talking, and there is this slightly intellectually incapacitated man. He had a stroke, who was a worker in the office of this rich man. He comes to meet his boss, and he tells the boss about having gone to Europe and seen all the graves of the soldiers who died in the war over there. And he says, I saw the grave of your son also. And then this man nods and everything and sends him away on along his way. And then, he comes and sits at his table and looks. And there is in his ink well, there is a fly that is, struggling. Understand? So, as he's looking at it, the fly manages to come out. Okay. And see, this is the thing. You are wondering where the story is going, right? The fly comes out. Now, he again, he says, okay, fine. I'm going to let me take a look at it. And he drops a drop of ink on the fly again. Okay. And then the fly shakes all of that off again and manages to survive. And just as, it is getting all strong and ready, he drops another drop of ink. Okay. And then again, the fly sinks under the weight of that drop of ink. Then, it kind of shakes. It is slower in its movements, but he does that. And then, it somehow manages to get back onto its feet again. And then what this man does, he's like, this is absolutely the last time I'm doing this. And he drops one more drop of ink. But that is too much for the fly. Okay. And he's going on egging the fly. He's encouraging it. He's like, come on, do it. You can do it. Don't give up. Don't give up. Damn it. He says. Understand? And that is when it begins to strike you that in the struggles of the fly to survive, he is seeing the son that he lost in the war. Okay. He feels that, somehow he thinks if his son had fought harder for his life, had tried harder to survive, had not been killed by his injuries, it would be a good thing. So, in a way, this man and fly have this relationship that he imagines God has with his son as he was dying. You see the allegorical connection? This is the way that sometimes people are intensely creative. They don't come forward and say he thought that God should have spared his son, or that maybe God was also playing with his son the way that he was toying with the fly. Understand? Because there is this famous line in Shakespeare: as flies to wanton boys are we to the gods, they kill us for their sport. Okay, so this is that allegorical connection that is there. Where when he's dropping that ink, he is being God, and the fly is his child, as he imagines happening on the battlefield. Understand? And then when the fly just dies, it breaks his heart, because he's thinking about the way that possibly his own son also died. Understand? Yes. Now, that brings us to this particular story, the little girl. Okay. Now, little girl talks about a child and the relationship that she has with her father. Okay. This is a child who is extremely terrified of her father. Okay, and there is absolutely not much of direct conversation that happens between her and her father. She views her father as the ultimate symbol of power. He seems big and terrifying to her. She's always quaking in her boots when she sees her father, and the interaction between them is extremely minimal. Understand? And she has a grandmother whom she loves very much. This is the kind of a family setup. Okay, and the father is an extremely busy man and everything. Now, one day the grandmother suggests that the father's birthday is coming, so why doesn't the daughter make him a pin cushion, make him a small cushion? So, she stitches the three sides of the cushion and then goes in search for something to stuff the cushion with, and finds in her parents' bedroom, she finds a set of papers that are there, very nice papers with some fine writing on them. So she takes all of that, tears them into small, small pieces, stuffs them into the cushion, and stitches it all up to prepare it for her father's birthday. In the evening, at that point of time, there's a huge uproar because the father cannot find the speech that he had prepared for a ceremony that was going to happen. Okay, and everybody is out looking everywhere. And then somebody asks her, I think the grandmother asks her, did you? The mother asks her, did you see those papers? And she's like, yes, I saw them. They were in your bedroom. I tore them up to make a pin cushion for father. Okay, so then the kid is just carried downstairs and put in front of the father, who can't absolutely believe what his daughter has done, and he's yelling at the top of his voice. Then the grandmother takes the girl away and asks her to relax, tells her that it is okay, and then the grandmother has to go away, and this kid is very worried. Okay, so there is a nanny or a general maid, she's called general in the story. That means she's a maid who's looking after the girl, and is putting her to bed. And then the she tells her, what am I going to do if I get a nightmare? How, what am I going to be doing? And she's like, well, if you get a nightmare, you just go to sleep, don't do anything else. Okay, and the woman goes away, and as she had predicted, she has a nightmare. And what she then sees is that her father is in the room, and he comes and gathers her up, and he takes her to his room. Okay, and what he does is he throws his cigar into the fire, clears up some space over there, and puts her on the bed, and lets her snuggle up to him. And he says, you can rub your legs against me and you can be warm. And she thinks, my father is like my grandmother, but only thing is that my father is more hard. Okay, he's stronger, he's more muscular kind of a thing. And she's like, once upon a time, she had thought of her father as a huge figure. Understand? And she almost imagined that this is how God is and everything. But there, lying right next to him, snuggled up to him, holding on to his coat, she thinks he doesn't seem to be that big after all. Understand? So the way that children kind of react to these things. And he was too tired, so he slept. And she thinks about everything that she did, about the paper and everything like that, and she kind of sighs. And the father asks, what happened? Did you have another dream? And she says, no, my head is on your heart, and I can hear your heart beating. And she says, what a big heart you have got, dear father. Understand? So this, it's a child who is talking to her father, a father who has withheld his affections all this while, or has been so removed from the child's life that she looks upon him as only a figure of authority. Okay, and not somebody who is a playful father. Because while there is this segment where she is looking at the house across their house, and there are like 5 children there, and there is a father, and at one point they're all playing on the lawn, and then a boy turns on the hose and drenches the father with it, and then he goes and tickles the boy, and the girl repeats, turns the hose on him, she says. So that sense of wonder that people can do this with their fathers, is that even possible? See, you have to read this story in the voice of a child in order to understand the enormity of the emotions that she is feeling by the end of the story. Understand? Till then, her father was an absent figure, a figure of authority, a figure of punishment, a figure of power, almost God-like in his stature, in his appearance. In her mind, he was 10 times the size that he really was. Understand? But with that one tender act, obviously he was up reading something and he was smoking, but that one tender act of coming rushing to her side when she has a nightmare and carrying that child to his bed and putting her to sleep, understand, humanizes him for her. Okay, brings him down to a level where she can truly love him, identify with him. Understand? So this bond that is there, an unspoken bond of tenderness, see, that is what humanizes the father for the child. This is what makes him special to her. And it is at that point that he stops being God and starts being human because she can finally hear his heart. Understand? So this story, talks not just about a little girl and the way she got over her fear. It also talks about these connections that exist between families that often, gets eroded or hidden away in the march of time. Okay, and which can come to the forefront at the time that you least expect it, and make you very happy. Okay, so that transformation of the father from a godlike figure to the figure of being a father, a human being, that transition is what is most interesting. Okay, and the fact that this is being told from the perspective of a child. So that the story is not very complicated. At the same time, it leaves a lot of aspects that are not said. The relationship between the mother and the father, the relationship between the grandmother and the father, the grandmother and the mother, none of these things are openly or explicitly stated because the child doesn't see any of these things. Understand? So what the child doesn't see, the reader also does not see. Okay, any doubts?